Hello and welcome. This presentation explains a user study where we were able to model user strategies and improve user performance on interactive dashboards. An interactive dashboard is a visualization tool that helps view and interact with complex underlying data using visualizations such as charts and tables. The adoption of dashboards has increased lately, as we saw many dashboards being created by World Health agencies to communicate the spread and evolution of COVID-19 virus to the public and to the media. But the problem is that users are still facing challenges interacting with these dashboards. If we take, for example, a project such as We Rate COVID Dashboards that was created by researchers at Yale University that rates COVID-19 dashboards created by colleges in USA, no more than 1% received the highest rating. This research is a continuation of two previous research works. The first is a literature review where we identified the problems that users face on dashboards. We found that users face many challenges, such as information overload and data understanding issues. The second work was an interview study with professional dashboard developers to understand the causes behind these problems and how we can fix these problems using adaptations. We selected 4 of these problems in our study, so the output of these 2 studies was input to our current study. We aimed at improving user performance by introducing adaptations to these dashboards, and we also aimed at detecting problematic strategies since some strategies are indicators of problematic behavior, so that when we detect these strategies, we can intervene in real time to adapt the dashboards. So we had 3 hypotheses. The first one was that introducing adaptations to problematic dashboards will improve user performance in terms of effectiveness, efficiency, and cognitive load. The second one was that the level of graph literacy of the user has an impact on their performance on dashboards, and that the third hypothesis was that users employ different strategies on problematic dashboards compared to the adapted dashboards. Our experimental design followed a 4x2x5 randomized within subjects factorial design. The first independent variable was the problems that we seeded into the dashboards. The first one was information overload, where dashboards show too much information to the users. The second one is inappropriate data order and grouping, where the information shown on the dashboard does not follow a coherent narrative and does not facilitate meaningful comparison. The third one is ineffective data presentation, where some charts are less effective in communicating the data than others. For example, pie charts as compared to bar charts. The fourth problem was misalignment in visual literacy, where the level of visual literacy expected by the developers does not align with the actual literacy of the users. The second independent variable was the dashboard type, where we had 2 types: problematic dashboards where these problems exist, and the adapted ones where these problems do not exist. The third one was the independent variable, and we gauged the level of graph literacy of users using a standardized test, and they ranged from 0 to 4. We had 3 dependent variables. The first one was effectiveness, which was 0 for any wrong answer and 1 for the correct answer, and then efficiency, which was the time it took the participant to complete the task measured in minutes and seconds, and the third one was the perceived cognitive demand reported by the user on 6 subscales: mental demand, physical demand, temporal demand, performance, effort, and frustration, using NASA TLX questionnaire. Participants completed information-seeking tasks, where the answer had to be a number, a percentage, country, or date. For example, on the problematic dashboard of the ineffective data presentation dashboard, they had to answer how many cases were still on treatment between 2 days. So the answer here had to be a number. The stimuli were interactive dashboards inspired by ECDC COVID-19 dashboards. We edited these dashboards to seed problems into them and then introduced adaptations to eliminate these problems on the adapted versions of the dashboards. Participants underwent a mandatory tutorial by watching a video and then a mandatory training to know how to interact and use the dashboards. We used 6 visualizations across the dashboards, and we enabled users to customize their dashboards with these customization functionalities. So this is an example of a stimulus. This is the problematic dashboard of the ineffective data presentation dashboard. Here we used two visualizations, which are bar charts and pie charts. The customization functionalities are on top of each chart. And the adapted version, we eliminated the pie charts and we used bar charts instead. While users were performing the experiment, we collected interaction data using UCivit tool, which gave us low-level interaction data, for example, event types, along other information. This is an example of the data that is given by the tool in JSON format. On average, each user generated 22,000 events. We did pre-processing on the data to make it more meaningful and more manageable to analyze later. In terms of the results, for effectiveness, we found that users indeed improved on the adapted dashboards as compared to the problematic dashboards, as shown by the significant difference between these two dashboard variants. On the adapted dashboards, users or participants got 64% of the answers correct, compared to 39% on the problematic version. We also found that effectiveness between some problems was significant, namely misaligned visual literacy problem and inappropriate data order and grouping. We also found significant differences between the adapted and problematic dashboards on two of the investigated problems. On the information overload, where the difference was clearly significant, and on the ineffective data presentation problem. Lastly, for effectiveness, we found significant differences for users on the lower end of the graph literacy scale. Those who scored 0, 1, and 2 improved significantly on the adapted dashboards compared to the problematic ones. Those on the higher end of the scale improved, but not significantly. For efficiency, we found significant differences between the completion time of some of the problems. For example, between misaligned visual literacy and ineffective data presentation problems. We also found significant differences in the completion time between those who scored 2 and those who scored 3. For the cognitive demand, we split the analysis into two parts: performance and then the average of the other 5 subscales. This is because perceived achievement correlates positively with a higher performance score, but for the other subscales, perceived achievement correlates negatively. So a higher score on these subscales means a lower perceived achievement. For the perceived performance, we found significant differences between how participants viewed their performance on some problems as compared to others. For example, between information overload and misaligned visual literacy. We also found significant differences between those who scored 0 and those who scored 2 and 3. So those who scored 0 perceived their performance higher than the other two groups. For the other subscales, the results show that there are significant differences between the perceived cognitive demand of the participants between some of the problems, for example, between the misaligned visual literacy and the ineffective data presentation. We also found differences based on the graph literacy scores, so those who scored 0 perceived themselves to face the least cognitive demand among all of the other users, but with significant differences between them and those who scored 1, and also between them and those who scored 4. In terms of the navigation strategies, we firstly used a sequential pattern mining tool to find the patterns in the data. We investigated the top 100 patterns for each dashboard, and then we did thematic analysis on these patterns to reach strategies. The emerged themes were visual exploration, where users hover over charts or other items on the dashboard, filtering to reach specific information, or customization to alter charts, and a combination of these strategies. We found that on the problematic dashboards, patterns increase as effectiveness decreases for all of the problems. We also found extensive exploration to be associated with less efficiency and less effectiveness. Extensive exploration is where there's a lot of visual exploration in the found pattern. On the adapted dashboards, we noticed that patterns decrease as efficiency increases for all of the investigated problems except for information overload, where users had to use filters to reach the required information. We also found on the adapted dashboards that customization is associated with higher effectiveness, and that the most common strategy is visual exploration, which is lighter than extensive exploration. In both types, the most common strategy was exploration and filtering, and we also found that the exploration of the top left chart was a very common behavior, even when that chart was irrelevant. Now we revisit our hypotheses. The first hypothesis held true in terms of effectiveness, but not for efficiency or cognitive demand, since they did not improve significantly. Information overload problem was the one that improved the most, which indicates that reducing stimuli and using filters can help improve effectiveness, but not necessarily efficiency. The second hypothesis held true, since we found that graph literacy did indeed affect user performance. Those with lower graph literacy improved the most. The third hypothesis also held true, since we found distinctive interaction strategies between the problematic and the adapted dashboards. These strategies were different depending on the problem faced. For example, on the adapted information overload, there was an absence of extensive exploration and a focus on reading numbers. Our interaction analysis and user modeling helped us isolate problematic strategies and, more importantly, helped identify users who were struggling but were unaware. These can open up avenues for automatic adaptations by showing tips in real time to the users, highlight typical task-relevant areas, or suggest different actions, such as displaying different information to the one presented. With these takeaway findings, I conclude my presentation. Thank you very much.